On today's World Insight, global shares take a beating amid anxiety over oil and viral infections. What could help calm them? And turning a corner in COVID-19 containment. What mask diplomacy means for hardest hit nations. Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. We begin today's program with volatile global markets. On Monday, Wall Street suffered its sharpest drop since 2008 financial crisis. It came after Russia and Saudi Arabia failed to reach an agreement on crude production cuts, rattling financial markets already on edge over the spreading of COVID-19. How badly could this affect the global economy? What can be done to shore up shares? Before we get down to a discussion with panelists from different parts of the world, take a look at this first.
The closing bell ended the bloodbath on Wall Street, taking a more than 7% hit on Monday. The worst trading day since the 2008 financial crisis left traders dumbfounded. In a rare move, trading was halted for 15 minutes. Just minutes after the stock market opened on Monday, the S&P 500 fell 7%. The massive sell-off triggered a key market circuit breaker that paused all trading, the first market-wide halt since 1997. Global markets were feeling the heat, reeling from fears of a global oil price war and a worsening COVID-19 outbreak. London's index of top shares ended nearly 8% lower. European markets tumbled more than 7% across the board. Australian shares had their biggest value shaved in over a decade, while Japan's Nikkei 225 index was down 5%. In China, the benchmark Shanghai Composite fell 3%, while the Hang Seng Index sank 4.2%. Sparking the sell-off was an ongoing rift between big oil producers Russia and Saudi Arabia over how to cope with lower demands due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Saudi Arabia on Saturday slashed official crude selling prices after Russia rejected oil exporters' demands to cut output. That set off an alarming slide for which oil prices on Monday fell almost a third, the biggest drop in 30 years.
Look, you've got one of the most powerful commodities in the hands of two of the largest superpowers in the world, and they are not agreeing on it. And you throw that on top of a market that's full of anxiety about the potential economic global slowdown due to the virus, which I don't even think we've seen yet, and you end up with a perfect storm. That's what we have in there today.
While COVID-19 may have initially sent jitters to markets, many are concerned it could be the catalyst of an economic recession. A confluence of many troubles ahead, but what could help calm anxiety-filled global markets?
For more on the turbulence of the markets, joining us in Brussels, Fraser Cameron, Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center there. In New York City, Anthony Chan, a former JP Morgan Chase Chief Economist. Last but not least, via Skype from Beijing, Liu Baocheng, the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Before we start to talk about the economy, I want to talk about what exactly is the latest situation of coronavirus or COVID-19 in where you are, particularly the other two guests coming from New York and also from Brussels. Mr. Chan, of course, today in New York City where you are, things have been changing very fast. And meanwhile, schools and universities are talking about closing over the next week or two. So tell me about how people are looking at the latest change and what does that mean, could be, for the economy?
Well, I think that right now what they're doing is taking extra precautionary measures to contain the growth of this virus. And what it means, of course, is that these measures are going to slow economic growth and potentially have a negative impact on consumer and business sentiment. And so that is a real concern. And even with all that, financial markets are still worried that maybe those containment measures may be too late.
What about for you, Mr. Cameron? How are situations like in capitals around Europe? France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, even Switzerland, of course, Italy. So how are things?
In a word, bad. I mean, the worst hit is obviously Italy. There's more than 10,000 cases of people affected by COVID-19 there. But in all the countries you've mentioned, there have been outbreaks. So now the European leaders are coordinating on a daily basis at the political level, at the technical level, to ensure that there is a combined European response to this outbreak.
With all of these uncertainties, may I ask the three of you whether there's likely to be even more political uncertainties and economic policies uncertainties as a result of this, Mr. Chen?
Well, I think that right now the political uncertainty is there, but they're taking very aggressive measures. And of course, historically, these viruses don't last forever. They last just a period of months, and then things start to die down. Right now, the reason why everyone is so worried, and financial markets and people alike, is because first, they don't know for sure if this will follow the pattern of SARS or even the Spanish flu or the Shanghai flu or the avian flu. Historically, we would expect that over the next several weeks we will see a peak, but because we don't have any certainty as to when that will occur, you're going to see these aggressive measures that undoubtedly would slow economic growth and dampen sentiment, and that's causing a lot of unrest and a lot of concern in financial markets and people alike.
Will income tax cuts in the U.S. be able to help to boost the confidence, particularly in a sustainable way, or this is only a boost to the market at one day or two? Let's just come over this slope if we can. Mr. Chen.
The reality is that we need a broad spectrum of strategies. Payroll tax certainly would be very helpful. Some people feel that that shot in the arm will help, but others say that if you can't go to work because you're sick, you're not getting any relief on the payroll tax because you're not paying the payroll tax. So what we need is everything, all hands on deck. We need the central bank to lower rates. We need that payroll tax. We need some more money to actually fight the virus with health professionals, because at the end of the day, all the stimulus is great, but if we don't do anything to really contain this virus or eradicate it from a medical perspective, then it's all for nothing. So we really need to have all these things operating simultaneously.
All at the same time. That is the key here. Mr. Cameron, I would assume similar challenges or somewhat similar challenges inside Europe as well. Today already, German Chancellor talking about 75% of Germans could be infected if not right and appropriate measures being taken, Mr. Cameron.
Yeah, that's a very scary figure that the Chancellor Merkel mentioned. No, I think I agree very much with what Mr. Chan said. I mean, you have to take, and the Europeans are taking, coordinated measures. There's a limit to what you can do actually on the stimulus side. Nearly everyone has already cut bank rates, for example. There's not much more scope there. There's an extra £30 billion being pumped into the British economy as a result of the Finance Minister's statement this afternoon in London. Equally, I think you've got to make sure that all the necessary medical measures are taken. And what worries a lot of Europeans is actually the state of the health system in the United States, because it's just, I think, the tip of the iceberg there. And the health system in America doesn't seem to me to be able to cope with this.
Why are the Europeans so worried about what's going on inside the United States? One would wonder.
40 million Americans with no insurance cover.
Is there enough reason for that, Mr. Chen, you think, the concerns from Mr. Cameron?
Well, that is a real serious concern. We have over 20 million people that don't have health care, but one of the things the administration is studying is to be able to provide urgent medical care for those individuals that are impacted by the virus at no charge. So therefore, that this will be a situation that will not be an impediment towards the containment of this virus. We really need everyone that needs treatment to receive treatment. And right now, we are ramping up in the United States the number of tests that are being taken, the number of precautions to make sure that those that are somewhat contaminated or infected to be able to either self-quarantine if the case is mild, or certainly go and receive medical treatment, and that cost should not be a consideration.
We understand the test kits are still in the process of being produced, and then there's the complicated issue of what labs to do what, whether they will be able to do it. That's only the testing, not to talk about the treatment. Well, things are very complicated. We have experienced it, Professor Liu, from the very beginning until now. China was in the fire first. So, Professor Liu, what about the economy here? As there are already slowing down of the economy, certainly from the middle of January until now. Now to say it was coupled by the earlier trade war between China and the United States. So what's the economy, the state of it now?
Well, we had a very poor performance during the first 2 months of the year for obvious reason of the disruption caused by the virus. But gradually, when more and more migrating workers, roughly more than 60% have really returned to work, and with precautionary measures also, and also the production is resuming. And I think more encouragingly is the highly developed e-commerce that is there to cater to people's needs. So therefore, it seems that the panic is really getting far more dispersed, and the visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Wuhan, which is the origin of the virus, is really very much pacifying, give a lot more confidence. And so the gear is shifting more from the containment of the virus, which is still going on, but a lot more to economic growth and also poverty alleviation in China.
I see. But Professor Liu, if I could ask you about that,
sure.
We are not sure yet where the virus come from, because we only know where is the first outbreak. The first outbreak is in China. So that's what we know. However, having said that, though, that's another thing. Let's focus on the economy. About the economy, you're suggesting, it seems to me, between words, that the crisis facing the Chinese economy could be partly resolved through the new streamline of its industries or of its different factors in this economy. Is that what you're trying to say? Will online business be able to help China out of the current very difficult situation?
I think there are several encouraging factors. One, of course, the Chinese government has announced the ambitious plans to funnel like 34 trillion RMB to deal with the new infrastructure development. By saying it's new, it's not only building roads and ports, but rather to develop more of the information technology and also higher energy, and also the recycling economy. And the other is, of course, China is really shifting its paradigm on a very rapid basis. For example, right now, our school is not completely open physically, but we have been teaching without delay over internet. Tencent is providing a very good, very friendly, the virtual classroom. So I seem to like it after my jittering. And also that people are getting more and more reliant on this change. But one thing is that we need still continue to tackle is the blockade, the physical blockade for transportation, because different villages, different towns have really taken very tough measures to restrict the flow of people and goods. But now I think there is a need to be a relaxation on selective basis.
Okay, but what about small and medium-sized enterprises? Professor Liu, I'm not sure whether you have been walking out of your room much recently. A lot of those enterprises have been thinking about how really to survive. You also heard about restaurants, because nobody is going to support a catering industry. Nobody wants to dine outside their household. So these restaurants have begun to become a kind of a middle seller of vegetables. And also, some of the schools, if they could could operate online. They are already quite lucky because many of the schools cannot operate without students. So they do not have any income. I'm talking about private schools, and which are quite a huge number here in China. So these are only some of the examples that some industry are really suffering, not to mention traveling. The online travel booking or airlines, hotels, all of these could be problematic. So Professor Liu.
Yes, undeniably, the hardest hit would be the hospitality industry, entertainment, or anything that people can gather will really suffer.
Do you think there's a way out already?
Well, I think the situation turning more and more to normal, and people's confidence is coming back.
Okay.
And also that with the more of the government support to the small and medium-sized businesses by reduction of the room rent and supporting more of the financial liquidity, and some of them will survive. But of course, even without the virus, China will have to go through a very rapid consolidation process, and some of the small players will have to retreat because there are just too many players in this market.
There are a lot of complicated situations that the Chinese economy have to deal with right now. But if we talk about internationally, what's likely to be the logic here? I mean, obviously, coronavirus is going to be a time that sets a format for every economy to go through, but at the same time, be able to, they have to figure out a way to survive. Mr. Chan, different economies are at very different stage of experiencing this COVID-19 test. So do you think these economies will be able to still work together given the fact that there has been cut of traveling, people have to stay at home, quarantine, people have to telecommuting? Will these really be able to make up to the loss of the economy?
I have no doubt that there will be a recovery, but before the recovery takes place, there'll be significant pain. Yeah. And I think, as you hinted, there are going to be some economies around the world that are going to be more vulnerable. I think that at this stage, I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that the greatest threat of recession right now is Europe, because they were growing very slowly to begin with before the virus. The U.S., of course, was growing at a 2% pace before the virus, and I think that this year, 2 months ago, I was on your network and I said that we would grow in the U.S. about 1%. That was a very aggressive number that was very low, but we are now hearing from the Office Management and Budget that that number will come very, very close to 1%. They are reducing those numbers. Global economic growth, I think, could come very, very close to 2.5%, even lower. And we know that the IMF says that whenever economic growth globally is 2.5%, that means that some economies undoubtedly have the risk of falling into a recession. The U.S., I don't want to say that the risk of a recession is zero, but again, given all the stimulus that's going to take place, especially all the money that's going to be spent on the healthcare sector, all those things I think minimize the risk but do not eliminate the risk of a potential recession moving forward. But I do expect that as you move into the second half of the year, it's not clear whether it's the third quarter, but certainly by the fourth calendar quarter of this year, we will certainly start to see some sort of a recovery in the U.S. economy. Yeah. This virus, even though the financial markets think it's going to last forever, will not last forever. There will be some point where we will be able to see light at the end of the tunnel. Well, sometime, but time is very important when we talk about the time, right? Sometime for investors, that's going to be extreme unpredictability, I would assume. Mr. Cameron, if I could also invite you, is Mr. Cameron possible now to be linked to? Okay, great. So, Mr. Cameron, your American colleagues were a little bit worried about the European economy and also thinking there will be the light of at the end of the tunnel eventually. What do you make of these 2 points?
Well, I agree. I mean, it's a lot of uncertainty in Europe. The growth rates throughout the continent have been going down by all the economic predictions from OECD, European Commission, IMF, probably only just over 1.5% max this year. It was only going to be about 2.5% anyway, so that's going to happen. And of course, the uncertainty continues. Until we resolve the crisis over the virus, we're not going to be able to see any genuine pickup in the real economy. So it will take time.
So let's take a look at the situation overall, maybe not just about either one or two of the events, but rather where is it going now? We have a COVID-19, which is a public health emergency globally, which we haven't encountered for quite a long time. Whether it's Ebola or H1N1, it never impacted the world in such a way, if I could recall, over the past few decades. Secondly, we also, during a time of drastic geopolitical changes and also global supply chain change possibility as well. So how will all of this, when mixed up, likely to tell us how huge some change are likely to take place in the near future? Professor Liu, if you could be concise about this question.
Well, I think
by the way, nobody knows the answer, gentlemen. About that, nobody knows the answer. That's exactly why we need to talk about it. Professor Liu.
That's right. I think the paradigm of international cooperation is also gradually changing, and that's also pop up a new frontier for those countries with high research capability will be able to work together, and it really reminds people that we do have a shared destiny in front of such a virus, so which is really uncomparable for some of the regional, Ebola or MERS, etc. So now it's taking place, and it's
so you think cooperation will be the way out, and you think it will take place,
and also research. So merely by defending over uncertainty, that can only provoke further fear and panic. But we have to go more aggressively to find solution or discover a vaccine to address the problem.
Well, we understand that theory. Everybody would agree with your logic, but will that really take place, particularly not just about this health crisis, but beyond? Mr. Chen, it seems to me it's more complicated than goodwill cooperating.
But I really do agree that cooperation is going to take place. I've studied all the pandemics and all the flu viruses dating back to 1918. I was in China during the SARS epidemic before and after and during, and I've seen a lot of them. Even the 1918 one was pretty bad. But one of the things that I'm seeing this time around that I've never seen before is that it's now a medical arms race. We are now experimenting with drugs earlier than we ever have before. We are now developing solutions faster than we ever have before. So I really think that when we make a comparison as to how long it will take for us to get out of this compared to other past epidemics, it's going to be much quicker. Much quicker doesn't mean it gets resolved in the next 6 weeks or in the next 2 weeks, but it does say that compared to others, it will be faster.
But
need is the mother of invention. So.
Well, the question really is not just about when are we going to get out. Of course it's important, but when we get out of this chaos, what are we going to do? What's likely to be the logic of the days after? Is it going to be cooperation, or is it going to be further division? Nobody knows, but I think it's an interesting question. Will the goodwill, I know Mr. Cameron now from the EU, from Brussels, is having a difficult time listening to us, but, what is likely to be the logic? That is things that people need to think about. Do you think that the market change this time is providing some kinds of food for thought for at least investors? Mr. Chen.
I really think so. You've heard the recent comments of Christine Lagarde in Europe, basically saying cooperation is crucial. Here in the United States, I think we realize that when there is a crisis, you have to come together. And this is not a crisis in the United States. This is not a crisis in Europe or a crisis in Asia. It's a global crisis. So I think that the hint that was given before, that necessity is the mother of invention, is true. We absolutely need global cooperation. I think we'll get it.
Mr. Cameron?
Yes, I agree. There's no way any one individual country can deal with this on its own. In Europe, we have open borders. We're not shutting them down. So I think the only solution is global cooperation.
The only solution is, but are we going to seek that real solution? That is the question, Mr. Cameron.
Yes, we are. I mean, I think every day there's video conferencing between European leaders and Chinese leaders with the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Africa. It really is already happening, both in the WHO and also at other levels too. So this cooperation is ongoing, and it's absolutely necessary.
Now, gentlemen, before we wrap up today's discussion, which is a wonderful discussion, let me ask you about this. From now throughout the test, the global test by COVID-19, what will be some of the signs of the economies that you are looking for that's likely to tell us what's going to be like after all of this? Mr. Cameron, you want to go first?
I think there's no question there's going to be a serious look at the supply chain situation. I mean, China has been the sort of manufacturing hub of the world for the last 20 years. Many companies in Europe and America put all the eggs into the Chinese basket. I think they'll now be questioning whether that was a wise decision. It doesn't mean they'll be turning their backs on China, but it does mean they'll be looking quite as to how they can actually outsource their supply chains to other countries and also do more at home. I think that's going to happen too.
Mr. Liu, Professor, briefly?
Well, you know, this epidemic is really a black swan event that cannot really alter the global pattern of supply chain. So I think now political leaders, particularly for the biggest economies, they will have to you know, bring it into an even keel between dealing with the virus, but in the meantime shifting more of the focus still on economic growth, because that's a long-term sustainable way to make people happy and deal with uncertainty.
Professor Chen, Mr. Chen?
Yes, I'm going to be looking at business and consumer confidence. We have daily measures of consumer confidence. We're going to look at those to see how that changes. And finally, I'm going to make a prediction. I think we're going to lower tariff rates for both the U.S. and China as a way of pursuing that global cooperation. I think it will happen.
Wow, that's a big announcement. For now, I want to thank the three of you joining us, particularly helping us to understand the murky water we are going through right now. Hopefully, we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. But good health for all of you and your beloved ones. Fraser Cameron, Anthony Chen, Liu Baocheng, thank you. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Still to come on the program. Turning a corner in COVID-19 containment, what mask diplomacy means for hardest hit nations. That's up for a talk right after this break. Welcome back. I'm Tian Wei, and you're watching World Insight. Within days of a global spike in COVID-19 cases, medical masks quickly became one of the most needed commodities being snapped up online and offline around the world. As viral infections swell, it has led to global shortages of medical supplies. So some countries decided to send supplies to those who need them the most. Masks have become to be viewed as a gesture of big goodwill. For more about the so-called mask diplomacy, joining us in Washington, D.C., Chen Li, a director and senior fellow at the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. Dr. Chen, welcome to our program. You didn't wear a mask today in Washington, D.C.?
No, actually, that's probably still politically incorrect to wear a mask. I think this is certainly worrisome. But so it's not in this area. Maybe some part of the U.S. people start to wear masks, but in Washington, D.C. still hardly see anyone to wear a mask.
Not wearing a mask yet, and yet you've been thinking about mask and mask diplomacy. Recently, you wrote an article together with your colleague about how diplomacy is taking place between China and Japan through the mask. Tell us, how that works?
Well, the generous gifting of masks between China and Japan and it's really fascinating phenomenon. This phenomenon is spontaneous, widely spread, reflecting both the top-down and the bottom-up in terms of both government and the public, both NGOs and the corporations. In a way, it's very, very moving because both countries, especially early on Japan, they also need a mask, but they just selflessly send a huge amount to China. And there are certain things that I wanted to mention. I think this really, the exchange of masks has taken to a new level of goodwill. Now, here are the examples. First, the Japanese leadership, the LDP members, they actually voted to donate 5,000 yen to China to fight the outbreak of the virus. And also the numerous organizations, I mean, reflect the really multi-generations, they send so many boxes to China of the masks. And in many of the boxes, they mark the ancient poem, a very powerful line, lands apart, sky shared. This certainly, I mean, Chinese social media react very positively. They love that poem. And also that the famous Tokyo-based Matsuyama ballet group, and were filmed and staged singing the songs to cheer Chinese people. And also in return, Jack Ma, China's richest man, also committed $15 million to help Japan to fight coronavirus, and also donated 1 million masks to Japan. So this is really a wonderful story, and I think there's a lot of stories could be found, and that certainly improved relationship in a very dramatic way.
Dr. Lee, fascinating stuff what you have just said over there. It reminds me of the earlier conversation we had on our show today regarding the economy. So the question really is, are we going to look at the world now very differently because of COVID-19 and its possible impact on how we live, we think about ourselves, and how we think about our relationship with the others, this time through the masks, it seems. Dr. Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's often said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I'm a little bit hesitant to say that, to consider the huge cost and the death. But there's a message that people learn lessons from crisis. Yeah. And this makes people realize we are really living in the same world. And the poem I just mentioned reflected that. A friend of mine at People University, Wang Yuwei, said, win all or lose all in this global pandemic. So that revelation is extremely important. Unfortunately, that we learn that lesson in a hard way. I mean, particularly those people really do not pay too much attention to this crisis. Actually, in your last program a month ago, I already quote Bill Gates. He told us really 5 years ago that it's not just our system is imperfect or have problem, but we simply do not have system to deal with this kind of widespread pandemic, the virus. So I think this should be a wake-up call. Fortunately, China and Japan really learned that lesson early on, and I think that I hope that will also teach people elsewhere.
Focusing on the China-Japan story, Dr. Lee, as you may recall, you also mentioned in your article, in fact, that the relationship between China and Japan was not being mended only with the test of COVID-19, but rather over the past few years, we've seen a sharp rise, actually, of Chinese students in Japan and the other way around as well. Meanwhile, sharp rise of Chinese tourists going to Japan too, and at the same time, more interactions among the business sectors between the two sides, the private sectors. So all of this seems to be paving a way for a very natural goodwill gestures from both sides now, Dr. Lee.
Well, absolutely. As we know that Japan and China is the most problematic relationship in the world. It has been caught up with historical grievance and deep-rooted mistrust, and also still unresolved territory disputes. And also there's some competition may not be so friendly and etc. Now, but all these things now put aside because we look at the bigger cause, and this reflects not only the best of humanity, but also the realization that we need to fight together with this kind of challenge. So I think that if a relationship such as China and Japan can improve in a drastic way, in a quick way, I think that there's a hope that the other relationship can also improve, no matter what you talk, what relation you talk about that. So that's probably will come out very strongly as a lesson. I hope that, of course, there's some tensions between China and Japan will not disappear overnight. But I think that certainly they give us the term and some of the important goodwill that the people will remember. And also, these things, it's not just because virus. Actually, the top leadership, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Abe, already tried very hard early on. Unfortunately, the summit did not happen, but I think it will resume very soon and after the control of the virus. I think plus the Olympics, and first in Japan and then in winter in China. I think these are all the signs that both countries will move to the right direction. And also the tremendous need for cooperation between the second and the third largest economy in the world.
Certainly. But Dr. Li, while you are talking, it reminds me there are so many different factors in terms of the nature of a relationship, whether it's China and Japan or China and U.S., where you are in Washington, D.C. For example, the role of the media. Now, when you have a public health crisis, the role of the media tends to be more providing information and not creating panic, while at the same time trying to present more human stories in this coverage. It's just a natural way the media does things when it is a public health crisis. So how much of that, what we are seeing today, have to do with how media have been working since the start of this public health crisis? In other days, maybe the media, the only source people got to know about each other from, has been focusing very much on other stories which might not necessarily help the two peoples to be at least being friendly toward one another. So it seems to be very different and complicated factors. Dr. Li, you have much better understanding than I do, I'm sure.
Well, you already mentioned that the media and including the Chinese official and the social media already changed its rhetoric about Japan. That's certainly it's evident that if you look at the programs over the past few weeks in China, similarly, Japan, the public mood also start to change. Now, talking about the United States, because I live here, and certainly there's some kind of demonizing China, point finger China in some of the politicians that certainly want to play that kind of game. But I also want to say that if we look at some other media, that actually they fear. They now think that some politicians it's simply not right to point finger to China, including the CNN coverage last night, because I looked at the election, follow election very, very closely, and Mr. Cuomo in CNN, the anchor person, he said that he hoped that politicians will not just blame everything to China. So that is the mainstream media. But also I noticed that in the past week or so, that all the networks actually no longer just bashing China. Of course, from time to time, you will see some people talk about the Chinese virus or China virus. But we should put it in perspective. I really think most people, they have a goodwill. They maybe do not have too much information. Maybe we need to wait for some time for the mindset change. But certainly, the China-U.S. relation improvement that give us some hope. I think we do not have too many choices before the even bigger disaster.
Now, the fundamental question, Dr. Li, is that you have been a witness to the complicated relations between China and the United States. There are also other important bilateral relations between China and Japan, for example. But will COVID-19 and the afterthoughts we have, if we could go through this time of difficult time, be able to reprioritize what we need to focus on and what can we really focus on? Will that be the trend? I really have a big question mark. What about from analysts like you?
It's a very good question. I think Martin Wolf, a famous reporter for Financial Times, was once asked about a couple of years ago, what could change this kind of hostility between China and the United States. He said, unless the Mars invaded the Earth. Of course, that's a joke. But now we do face the really devastating challenge, the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. That makes us to think about the possibility for cooperation. I think that the important thing is we do need to emphasize international public good, not just look at the narrow-minded national interests. There are public goods including nuclear non-proliferation, climate change, public health, anti-terrorism, you name it. I think this probably will have profound impact. Maybe I'm a little bit naive, too optimistic, but I think that the debate will also become more dynamic around the world, especially probably in the United States, I hope.
We hope that will be the case. Thank you so much, Dr. Cheng Li from the Brookings Institution. All the best and be healthy. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can try to search our program, World Insight, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel, our Twitter and Facebook accounts. From me, Tian Wei, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.